Welcome to a new video in my home automation series, and I think about a week ago I did a video on the dashboard 2.0, and I said that it is missing one thing. It is missing one thing that I immediately noticed is a gauge. And I think, well, definitely today or very recently there was an update, and I just happened to look that on, if there is an update, and I clicked on the update, and I got a comment on my latest, on the last video, saying that the gauge has been added to the new update. So here it is, and that's what I'm going to show you today. I think it's going to be quick and easy because, well, it is a gauge. It has some nice features. As you can see, it is different from the last gauge, as in it doesn't have all the different features. Like, I think the old one had this water bowl thing where the water was sloshing around, so it doesn't have that. It just has these traditional half or 3/4 gauges. But it has some additional things like colors and the segments as well, which are, I think, is going to be useful. And there's a lot of the graphical part which is customizable, which wasn't really a case with the old one. And just on the side, I'm going to show you these progress bars as well. So if you need something which is more like a progress, not so much as a gauge, you can use these circular progresses as well. Okay, so let's look into this. So just like in all of my videos, I'm going to publish the flow to this one, and I just want to mention something before I continue, is I'm going to export this flow, and when you import the flow, what is going to happen is that in the previous video I said how the new dashboard has bases and pages and groups and individual UI controls. But at the moment you can only have one base. So if you have already created a base, and if you import MindFlow, that's probably going to create a second base, UI base. And that is going to give you an error. So what you can do is, so you will see that I have a UI base which is called the Node-RED dashboard. And once you import my flow, you're most probably going to have another UI base. So what you do is, before to deploy the changes, go into the UI node and go into the group. There is going to be two groups. One is going to be for the gauges, and the other one is going to be for the circular progresses. And then go into the page, and then in the UI, select your UI base. So move it to my UI base to UI base, and then once you have done that, you can select the second duplicate UI base here, and you can just click on delete. Because if you don't do that, if you deploy, you will get an error message that you can't have two bases in your installation. And you can do these changes after that as well. I'm just showing you what the issue is, because this caught me a little bit off guard when I did it for the first time. And this is something that hopefully will get fixed by the, I don't know, either the import process or the deployment process, that it's going to get rid of the duplicate UI bases, but it's not happening at the moment. Okay, so let's do the gauges first. Let me show you the whole thing as well. So we have basically two different designs. We have the half gauge. These first two one is the half gauge, and we have these quarter gauges as well. And as you can see, you can customize sizes, like how big the gauge should be. And besides the gauge, we also have these segments, which you can color code based on sort of like threshold and that sort of values. And then of course you have a minimum and you have a maximum values, and you have the actual reading, and you have a unit of measure as well. And you also have prefixes and suffixes, which I did not use at the moment, so you can create those additionally as well. And also in the design we have two more things. So you can have needles which point to the exact value, or you can or you can just omit the needles and have them rounded like this one. I think both of them looks quite nice. I mean, the needle is more like a sort of the traditional, but I think this is more like modern looking, with the sort of like the rounded end of the gauge. So in order to place a gauge, well, it's very simple. We have a new I always have to remember not to look at release dashboard 1 stuff. So this is the new gauge. Yeah, the event is a new one. So this is the new gauge, and you just put it onto your flow and you assign it to a group just like before. What I have done so far is I set everything to auto, so the size, but we can change this later on a little bit. And as you can see, you have two types, the half gauge and the quarter, 3/4 gauge. So this is half, this is 3/4. It's, I mean, yeah, you have more, you know, travel in the 3/4 gauge, and the value is actually in the middle, whereas in this one, it's a lot of like 1/3 up from the base. And as I said, in the style, you can have the needle, or you can have the rounded off. So that's the needle, and that's the rounded off version. And you specify what is the minimum and the maximum range for the gauge. So this is by default 0 to 100. So I set it to 1050. So it's like, you know, temperatures, like heating temperatures, that sort of stuff. And you can also create these segments. And these are the segments that are appearing here on the outer rim. And I made one error initially, is that if you have to be sure that the start of the segment matches with the minimum value, because otherwise they get sort of like offset and it's just not going to look correct. So make sure that the minimum of the first segment is the first is same as the minimum. Sorry, the value of the first segment is same as the minimum, and then you create these additional segments and you assign a color to them. So now we are starting at 10 with green, and then from 25 it's orange, and from 40 it is red. And as you can see, so that's the 25. So 26 is now orange, so it goes to the orange sector, and from 40 is going to go into the red sector. And as you can see, the gauge bar itself also shows the color corresponding to the sector. And of course, you can just delete the sectors if you don't want. And that's it. And you can put a label, which comes up here on the top, and you can do a prefix and suffix. So we can do like maybe A and B, and let's see how that looks like. Yeah, AB. I'm not really sure. I'm trying to think of something which is not a unit of measure and it's a suffix or a prefix. Maybe on voltage you can use like, you know, direct or AC if you want to have those. Yeah. But I'm not going to use this. Actually, one thing I have not checked is if I can. Unfortunately, it doesn't say here in the documentation. Let's quickly jump into documentation. If I can control these values from the payload, but it doesn't look like it. Okay, so that's the unit, or you can make these like that. Yeah, I'm going to show you some examples for that. Okay, there is nothing here, so I'm not really sure if you can control these values from the message, because all I'm doing here is I created this change node, so it just steps the values up and down. So all I'm doing is I'm passing a value in the payload, and that's it. But let's go back to documentation. And you have, the node properties, and you can have the unit of measure here, and then you can have the pixel width for the gauge, the gap, and the segment. So that's the gauge, that's the gap, and the segment. And you can have additional CCS styling, which I haven't tested or haven't used in any of these, because I think these colors are probably like, you know, a fair amount of customization anyway. So what I've been playing around, I mean, all these show the same numbers. Let me just redeploy so we don't see the suffixes. Yeah, so this is the standard sort of layout. I created 3 sectors. That's the same thing, but I created 2 sectors only. So you can see that, you know, up until this point, it's blue, and then it's red. And here, this is the same as the first one, but the 3/4 gauge. And the return water is different because I set the segments to 0, but I still created colors. So as you can see, it still turns red, and then it goes back to, you know, blue when it's here, but it's moving in the gap, in the gauge sector. So that's the return water. So you can see that the gap and the segments are 0, but the gauge is 16. And in the next example, I've done the other way around. So if you want to see the sectors and you don't want the gauge to change color depending on the different sectors, then what you can do, that's a solar heater. So I set the gauge and the gap to 0 and the segments is set to 16. So basically you control whether you want to view this as a gauge or you want to do the outer bit, which is the sector. But if you set one of them to 0, the other ones moves inwards as well. So the needle is always in place. And I was playing a little bit more around with this for the last one, where I set a very small sector and a very fat gauge for the heat pump. So the gauge is 64, the gap is 2, and the segments is 4. And it becomes even more interesting if you move it to a rounded style, because then this rounding also becomes really big. So I mean, that looks cool as well. I quite like this one. Yeah, so that's cool. And that's I mean, to be honest, that's pretty much it, what you can do with it. And as you can see here, the values are jumping by 2 degrees every time, and yet there is like a nice transition from the previous position of the sort of the needle and the rounded position to the new one. So it goes nicely. It doesn't like just jump from one position to the other. So it's visually very pleasing, I should say. So the other thing I wanted to show is, I mean, obviously you can make them smaller. And I tried playing around with this, and what I noticed that you have to be a little bit cautious about sort of sizing these components. So let me just change the first one to 2x2 pixels or 2x2 units. And if you see now, what happens is that the boiler temp looks okay, but then the feed water is a little bit skewed. So what I noticed that for the half segment ones, you have to specify the size as sort of like a 1 to 2. So you want to do it as 1 to 2, 1 times 2, or 4 times, sorry, 2 times 1 or 4 times 1. So it's sort of like rectangular, because then okay. So now it is not looking good, because then, you know, this keeps up the extra space for the because of this layout, the you know, the 3/4 gauge is bigger, so it moves everything up. But if let me just move these things around. So if I move the hot water up, sorry, the return water, and I set this one to 2 times 1 as well, then these guys resize correctly. So now you can see that they fit nice to, you know, next to each other. So I think if you want to use like smaller gauges, you can definitely do that. You should either rather put them into different groups, but then they take up extra space, or you just have to move them around. Like maybe you set them to the same style. Or if you set them to different styles, you may just have to play around with the order, because as you can see, it's now that I have the same size gauges in one row, everything is displayed correctly, and I can probably move, yeah, I can move the heat pump up as well, and then I make it smaller as well, so it's going to fit nice to the beep. If I do this and heat, not this one, the heat pump, if I do this 2x2, which was the other one? Boiler temp. Boiler, no. Sorry. Boiler temp. Nope. Yeah, now it's better. I mean, this guy's a little bit fat for this, but it still works. So, yeah. I think it needs a little bit of tuning if you want to use it in multiple groups, but it sort of works, and it looks nice, and actually I quite like these layout and everything. So these things look fun, And I think I might even, no, I leave it as it is. It's, I could probably move this one here as well and set it by 2 by 1, but I think it's because these are, you know, 2 unit highs. This will make this 2 unit highs as well. So I mean the gauge itself and the header is going to be just all over the place, as you have seen previously. So if you see anything like this, just make sure that you just move them around, and probably you can find a configuration which is going to work. And what I also noticed, I'm not sure if it's related to like early version or something generic in dashboard 2.1, sorry, 2.0, is sometimes I have to just refresh the page. So if I make changes and deploy, sometimes the needles are all over the place, or the needles are just not just missing, and if I refresh the page, then everything looks fine. And sort of the same thing happens with these circular progresses as well. So for some reason they stopped working, and again this is related to refreshes, sorry, deployments, but if I refresh this page, then they start working. So I haven't really figured out why this is. Maybe this is a known bug in the dashboard, which will be fixed a little bit later on. Okay, so let's move over to the circular progresses. So this is actually part of the one of the Vuetify components. So everything is going to be in a template node, and that's also fairly easy to create. So as you can see, you create a template /template and v circular progress, and you have a couple of parameters. So you have rotate, size, width, and the value, which comes from value, and you have a color. So, oops, let's go back. So this is the rotate basically says if the rotate is 0, then it starts from here, and if it's 90 degrees, no, it's the other way around, sorry. It's minus 90 degrees, then the rotate starts from here, and for the other 3, the rotation is 0, so they start at 12 o'clock. And what else? We have a size, so that's the overall size of the wheel. So this is, I think, 100. I set this to 200. This one is 70. You can look at the examples, and this one is, I think, 60, or this is 200, and this is 300. So you can just make them a little bit bigger, but they occupy a slightly bigger area than they actually need to be. Maybe I can just change the value, change them a little bit, as in maybe they don't have to be 2 by 2, maybe 2 by 1. And we have a width, so that's the width of the actual circle gauge which goes around, and you have also a color. So you can put color names here, or you can do hash and like a 6-digit hex value. And also I was playing around with the text as well. So you can see this prints the value in the middle, and I just added percentage. And I was playing around with these a little bit. So here I put a different text, so header 5 for the value, which makes it a little bit bigger. And for the blue one, it's even bigger because it's you know, size 200. So, oh, this one is also a level header 3. I think I used, no, this one is only strong, so it's basically just bold. So I mean, these are the customizing options I found out. And of course you can put anything else here in the middle, but I thought the value makes, it just makes sense. And again, in the payload, I just send a value. So a value from 0 to 100. And by the way, if you're interested on some of these sort of like these technical things, I mean, I'm just learning all these view stuff here. So up here in the model, you define that the value that we are going to use for, you know, to tell what is the progress which is going to call value. And you also print the value inside the progress as well. So I mean, if you don't want it, then it's just going to become a circle, if you like that one. And you have to define in a script in the data section that you have a value variable, which by default is 0. And we also define a watch function, which, you know, if we receive a message and if the message.payload is not undefined, then we put the payload into the value. So this is how I put the the percentage that I send in the message.payload into this value variable, which then immediately updates the value of the circular progress, which redraws the circle, and it also updates the text in the middle. So that's how it works. And everything else is done by the component itself. So it draws itself. And by the way, here the increments are really, really small, but there is also like a nice transition here. So if you just jump between the values, let's say by 100, then it is still looking nice and sort of like animated. So if I do value equals value plus 10, I mean, the transition is a little bit quicker here, but it still works. So I think it looks fine. Well, that's it. I mean, we have gauges. We always love gauges. There is so much stuff that we usually put onto the dashboard, and these color gauges and the configuration is a lot of fun. I quite like it. I quite like the segments, and how you can play around with, whether you want the segments to be shown, or you don't want the gauge to be shown, or the other way around. And the size configuration, I think you can do a few different styles from these, and I quite like the fact that there is also a place to put the unit of measure as well. And probably this circular progress, I just wanted to leave it here because it's the same sort of things. I'm not really sure if we are going to use a lot of these, but maybe if you have a background process, you can just have this circular progress to show some sort of steps, like maybe you have an irrigation control and you sort of like step through the steps of the irrigation, and then it gives you a visual feedback of where it is, which zone the irrigation is at, how much time is left if a background process or some long process is running. As usual, I'm going to include the link for this flow in the video description. If you don't find these gauges, then make sure that you upgrade to the latest version. So as the time of the recording, we are currently at FlowFuse / Node-RED dashboard. This is 1.1.0. So I think it was previously 1.0.8. That was the version that I had in the morning, but with this 1.1.0 we have the gauges as well, which is great. So that's it. I think that should be all for this video. I already have a tons of other things that I'm working on, but unfortunately this Vue stuff is definitely new to me, and I'm really struggling to get some of the things working. So it takes a lot of time to get things put together, making sure that they are working. And still I only managed to do very basic things, like when you have some information and want to present it in some sort of form in the Vue. I haven't even started figuring out how you can do feedbacks and selections, and click on something and it sends a message back to Node-RED. It shouldn't be difficult, but I struggle with a lot with these already. So it may take some time until I get to some of the meatier stuff, but it's definitely coming. So stay tuned for that. But as always, thanks for watching, and see you next video.